So in the last episode, you get the basic concepts of how to use Retrofit in Android. So now in this episode, we are going to create a simple example of Retrofit. So here in this episode, we are going to create a simple Android application that fetch information from a remote database on a server and display that information on a recycler view. So here we are going to use Retrofit for fetch information from the server. So we need a server. So here I'm going to use a localhost as web server. I will show you the database first. Go to localhost, go to PHP myadmin. Here we have a database called the contacts DB. Here we have a table called the contacts. So this table contains 3 columns: ID, name and email. Now there is some data are available in this table. To retrieve information from this database, we must have some PHP scripts available on server. So now I will show you the PHP scripts on server side. Go to the WAMP root directory. Here I create a folder called the contact app. In that folder we have a PHP script called the read contacts.php. So this is the PHP script. So this PHP script get all the information from the database and return the result in the form of a JSON response. We can test the PHP script. So now I am going to run that PHP script. So this is the response from localhost. So this is a JSON array that contains a number of JSON objects. Each JSON object has 2 properties, name and email. So this is our database and server part. Now we can create the Android project. Now open Android Studio. Start a new Android Studio project. Specify application name. I name it as Retrofit Demo. Select an empty activity. Okay, now the project is created. First here I am going to add the internet permission for this application. So open manifest file and add internet permission. Now we need to add some dependency for this application. So these are the needed dependency for this application. So this is the dependency for using recycler view. This is the dependency for using Retrofit, and this is the dependency for using Retrofit converter JSON. So we have to add this dependency to the Android Studio project. Open Gradle script file, open module level Gradle file. Add all the dependencies here. Now sync project. Okay, now the project sync finishes. First we can set up the UI of the application. This is the activity main.xml file. Okay, first here I am going to change the root element into a relative layout. Now we need to add a recycler view to the activity main.xml. So here add a recycler view. Specify ID for the recycler view. Now specify the scroll bars. We need vertical scroll bars. Okay, now we can create a separate layout file for each item on the recycler view. So here we have it to display name and email on the recycler view. So we need to create a separate layout file for representing each item on the recycler view. So open a resource folder, right click the layout folder and create a new layout resource file. Specify the file name. Here I name it as raw item, and root element is a linear layout. Here orientation is vertical. I'm going to change that one into horizontal. Here width is match parent, height is also match parent. I change height into 80 dp. Now here I am going to add two text views for display name and email. Specify width into 150 dp. Specify height into match parent. For testing purpose, specify some text on it. Now change the text size. Change text size into 18 dp. Now change the text style. Now we have to align the text to the center, so we can use the gravity attribute. Here I'm going to use center vertical. Now specify some margin on left side, so layout margin left into 10 dp. Now specify an ID for the text view. Here it is name. So this text view display the name. Now we need another text view for display email. Change ID into email. Here it is an email. Now change width into wrap content. Okay, now it's looking fine. So this layout represents each item on the recycler view. So now we can start the retrofit coding. So for using retrofit, you need three things. First one is an instance of retrofit. Second one, you need a model class for serialization and deserialization. And the final one, you need an interface for possible API call. So first we can create the model class. So look at the response from server. Here the response is a JSON array that contains a number of JSON objects. So here each JSON object has two properties, name and email. So our model class contains two fields, name and email. So now here I am going to create a model class. So right click the package and create a new Java class. I name the class as contact. So in this class we need two variables. First one is name and email, because our JSON object has two properties, name and email. So create the variables. Now create the second variable. Now here I am going to add the getter methods for these two variables. Select getter methods. Now look at the response from server. Here the property name is name and email, but here name N is small letter, email E also small letter. But our variable name N is capital and E is capital. So in such situation you have to specify an annotation. If the variable name, if the property of the JSON object and variable name are same, then there is no need of an annotation. But here in our case our variable name and JSON properties are different. In such situation, for proper mapping you have to specify some annotation. So serialized name. Now in that annotation you have to specify the proper JSON property name. Here it is name. Now we have to specify the same annotation for email also. And here the JSON property name is email. So now our model class is ready. Now we need an instance of Retrofit. For that we need another Java class. So create another Java class. I name it as API client. Here I'm going to define some variables. Here it is base URL. Now specify the base URL. Here I use the IP address 10.0.2.2. This is because we are going to test this application on an Android virtual device. So this is the default IP address used by every Android virtual device to access the localhost. So in localhost we have a folder called contact app. So this is our base URL. Now we need another variable for Retrofit. I name it as Retrofit. Initialize that variable with the null value. Now here I am going to define a method that return an instance of Retrofit. It's a static method. Here the return type is Retrofit. Get API client. Here check some condition. If Retrofit equal to null, in that case we can create the instance. So Retrofit equal to new Retrofit builder. Now specify the base URL. So use this method base URL, and in that method you have to pass the base URL. Here it is base URL. Now specify the converted factory. So you have to use the add converted factory method. And here we are going to use the JSON converted factory and call the create method, and finally call the build method. This will return an instance of Retrofit. And finally we can return Retrofit instance from this method. So this class will give an instance of Retrofit. So for using Retrofit we need a model class, we need a Retrofit instance. Now we have to define an interface that contains possible API calls. Now we can create the interface for Retrofit. So right click the package and create a new Java class. I name it as API interface. Change kind into interface. In this interface you can define the method for the API call. Here we need only one method. Here it is get contacts. In this interface for every method there must be a return type. It is an instance of call class. And here the target type is a list that contains some object of contact class. And every method there must be an annotation. The annotation represents HTTP method and possible base URL endpoint. So here we are going to place a post request. So here I use a post annotation, and in that annotation you have to specify the endpoint of the base URL. Here I am going to specify an endpoint read contacts.php. So this is the method used for make an API call. So now we have the model class, we have a class that return an instance of Retrofit, and we have the interface for make the API call. Now we can make the request. So before going to do that, we have to define needed components for the recycler view. So here we already place a recycler view on activity main.xml. Now we need to create an adapter for the recycler view. So create a new Java class. I name it as recycler adapter, and this class extends adapter, implement needed methods. First, here I am going to specify the view holder class. I name it as my view holder. That class extends view holder. Specify a constructor with the super keyword. Now specify the generic type for the class. Here it is my view holder. For this method, the return type is an object of view holder class. For this method, the first parameter is an object of view holder class. Here I am going to define some variables. It is a list that contains some object of contact class. I name it as contacts. Now create a constructor for this class, recycler adapter, that contain one parameter, is a list that contains some object of contact class. Now initialize the list from this constructor. Now from the getItemCount method, return the size of the list. Now inside the view holder class, create some variables for text view, name and email. Now initialize the text views from the constructor. So name equal to first typecast that one into text view. Use the parameter item view. Find the view by ID. It is name. Now initialize the second variable. It is email, and here it is email. Now go to the onCreate view holder. Here create some variables for view class, layout inflator from parent.getContext, and inflate the layout. The layout name is row item, parent, one more parameter is a boolean, and finally we have to return an object of view holder class from here. So return new my view holder and pass the view as a parameter. Now go to the onBind view holder. From this method we can bind value to the text views. So holder dot name dot set to text. Now get the object from the list. So here it is contacts dot and pass the position. Now call the getter method. Here it is get name. Now set the email. Holder dot email. Here it is get email. Okay, now the adapter is ready. Now go to main activity.java. Here we need to create some variables. First we need some variables for recycler view. I name it as a recycler view. Now some variables for layout manager. Now we need a variable for recycler adapter. I name it as adapter. Now some variables for list that contain some object of contact class. I name it as contacts. Now we need a variable for the retrofit interface. Here it is API interface. I name it as API interface. Now we can initialize these variables. First we can initialize a recycler view. Typecast that one into recycler view. Now find it. Now we can initialize the layout manager. Here we need a linear layout manager. Now set the layout manager for the recycler view. Set layout manager and pass the layout manager. Recycler view dot set has fixed size into true. Okay, now we can make the request. So API interface equal to, first we have to get the instance of retrofit. So here it is API client dot get API client. Now you need to call the create method. In that method you have to pass the interface class name. Here it is API interface dot class. Okay, now we have the interface instance. By using that interface instance, we can call the appropriate method in that interface, and we have to save the return type in a call class instance. Here the return type is a list that contains some object of contact class. I name it as call. Now make the API call. So API interface dot get contacts. Now we have to make a method. We have to call a method called enqueue that contains some callback. Here we have two callback, on response and on failure. We can retrieve the information from the on response method. These two methods are executed on the main UI thread. So we can publish the result to the recycler view from this method. So now get the contacts. So contacts, it is a list, and call the response.body method. This will return the result to the list called contacts. Now we can initialize the adapter, new recycler adapter, and pass the list. Now set the adapter for the recycler view. So recycler view dot set adapter, pass the adapter. Now we finish the coding. Now we can test our application. Okay, now open the database. Here is our database. These are the informations available on the table. Now we can run our application. So run it. And here is the output. So here we retrieve information from the server using Retrofit and display the result on a recycler view. So this is how we implement Retrofit in an Android application. I hope you understand the concepts. Please subscribe my channel for getting more Retrofit video tutorial. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.